Adams.
Here.
Senator Higdon. Senator West.
Here.
Senator Yates. Representative Bratcher.
Here.
Representative Bridges. Representative Burke.
Here.
Representative Kleins.
Here.
Senator Mills. Representative Witten.
Here. Thank you. We do have a quorum and are constituted to do business today. But before we start and bring up any presenters, I ask if any members have any comments or guests that they would like to introduce today. Seeing none, we will get right to it. The reason for this housing task force, obviously it came from the House Concurrent Resolution 68, and I'm going to read out, just to give everyone some clear understanding of the areas of study that the task force is charged with. So the task force shall study and review the current and future policy needs of the state to address access and availability of housing to the citizens of the Commonwealth, including and not limited to a demographic analysis of housing costs, population, and employment opportunities statewide and regionally in Kentucky, a comprehensive review of state and local laws, regulations, policies, and procedures that affect housing, analysis of the availability and accessibility of housing to include examination of the costs of housing, utilities, and access to health care, evaluate land use, zoning, infrastructure, and community planning to identify barriers that impede the development and availability of accessible, adequate, and affordable housing, and finally, to examine efforts and policy changes in other states and municipalities to address increasing housing supply and encourage home ownership. So with that, we're going to call our first guest, which would be Wendy. Is that? Oh no, you tell me.
Stats first.
Okay, we're going to go stats first. Sorry. And for the record, just make sure you introduce yourself and make sure that the green light is on the microphone.
Good afternoon, everyone. Is that okay? Can you hear that? Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Matt Berry. I am the Executive Director at the Kentucky Center for Statistics, or KY Stats. Along with me is Dr. Beth Kelly, and she is the Research Director at KY Stats. Thank you all for having us today. What I'd like to start with, if you all don't mind, just to indulge me for 1 second, is just a bit of background on what we do at KY Stats. We never like to assume that anyone knows sort of exactly who we are and how we do what we do. So a very brief background prior to the meat of our presentation. KY Stats is an administratively attached agency in the Education and Labor Cabinet. This is a glimpse of our governing board. As you can see, we're governed by the Education and Labor Cabinet Secretary, Kentucky Department of Education Commissioner, Council on Post-Secondary Education President, KIA Executive Director, and the Cabinet for Health and Family Services Secretary. That's a mouthful, but I try to avoid the acronyms. So that is our governing board, just to give you a sense of sort of how we're developed. KY Stats is an agency, houses and maintains the longitudinal data system. So we refer to it as the Kentucky Longitudinal Data System, or KLDS. It looks a little bit like this. Don't worry about the particular words on this. It's really meant to show the sort of the array and types of data that we include in our system. Really, at the bottom line of what we do at KY Stats is we connect data across sectors and over time. And really our goal is to create, and I'll show you here on the next slide, create reports, analyses, evaluations, fulfill data requests, and do all sort of data reporting and research and analyses. The mission that drives us is, at its core, to use data to assist policymakers, practitioners, and the public at large in Kentucky with making better informed decisions. So hopefully that's what we're here doing today. I think it's what we're here doing today. And so again, thank you very much for the invitation. We're very happy to be here. Part of what we were asked to do, and I hope will be helpful, is to give an overview of some of the tools that we have already created at KY Stats. So everything that we're going to highlight for you already exists. It's publicly available on our website. We have QR codes that folks can access. And what we want to do is give a high-level overview and a presentation of kind of some of these tools to give a sense of the type of data at our disposal, the types of reporting that we can engage in, and things that may be helpful to your work, and hopefully perhaps spur some ideas around questions related to data that we may be able to help inform. So that's what we're going to look at. We're going to look at 3 different reports to give you a sense. The first is what we titled the Kentucky Legislative District Dashboard. So a couple of things real quickly before I go through this this report as background. I think there's 2 important things to note. One is the Legislative District Dashboard was created a few years back as in response to a specific request to give a sort of a demographic and data overview at the legislative district level. And so it was created in that vein. I would say that as I'm going through that, hopefully what this will show you is some of our capacity for data. And I think that there are other opportunities to build similar tools like this, and it may even be more relevant for your work to look at these kind of issues at the county level or the local workforce level, area level, excuse me. And so just as a suggestion that's a possibility as well. So this is an example. The other issue is a data issue. I promise not to be too big of a data nerd today unless you all ask me to, because we will do that. But this contains both data from our system and data from the U.S. Census Bureau, the American Community Survey primarily. So that's something that we often do is we will use our system, but we'll also kind of supplement with other data sources just to provide external or additional context, excuse me. So just that's the only data note that I wanted to mention. And then I'll kind of give a quick overview of the dashboard itself, and then I'll turn to Dr. Kelly for another example. So as you can see, this is the overview tab of the dashboard. We have it broken down into sort of 4 primary areas in addition to the overview: economic, education, health, and housing. And what I'll do is kind of repeat a pattern 4 different times so that you all can see the metrics which are included in each one of those tabs, and just to give you an example of what that would look like. So just to note, we have pulled up an example district. Again, this is really just to give an overview of key metrics at this geography. I've pulled up the district that I happen to live in, just so it doesn't, I think that's the easiest way to look at this and give the example. So this is the district that I happen to live in. This is an overview, as you can see, of kind of the eastern part of Jefferson County. If you were to go to the overview tab and pick one of these districts, you could see several key indicators. I'll zoom in here just so you can see the sort of the top part of the map. You can filter this by which chamber you'd like to look at, the district itself, the subject matter, so those 4 primary areas, and then which measure within that you'd like to look at. So in this case, we're looking at labor force participation in that particular region, and you can see not only does it show key metrics for that particular district, but also as it relates to the state as a whole. The other part of the overview tab is the bar chart area, or the bar chart portion, and this compares that district to state averages. So state averages on some of these key employment metrics, and we could filter by other metrics as well. Again, this is just an example. The gold bar are state averages or state totals, depending on the metric, and the blue bar being particular to that district. So again, it allows you the ability to sort of zoom in and out and compare or look at in contrast to one another, state and district level. So let me take a look at what it would look like to sort of zone in or zoom in on any one of these 4 broad areas. As I said, economic, education, health, and housing on this. So this is kind of an overview of, within the economic tab, what the metrics are included. So all of the bar charts there, again, you can sort of zoom in on any one of these, but the measures in this particular section include things like households on SNAP, median income, poverty rate, unemployment rate, and labor force participation, in addition to some others. And if you were to pick one of these in particular, again, this is just to be illustrative, and it's an example only. But if you were to look at, that district as compared to Commonwealth average for median income, you can zoom in on this chart, and you can do the same for any of those other metrics that I listed and many others that I didn't name in particular. Again, the same thing for the education tab. We have metrics like kindergarten readiness, college going, total keys amount, high school graduates with college credit, and you can see several others there as well. And you can see sort of the bar charts here on the right side, which would compare each of those for the district and the state. And then again, just to use an example and show sort of a zoom in here, the percentage of high school graduates with college credit at the district and state level. And so I should have noted probably on the first one of these, and I'm sorry I didn't, but 2022 is the most recent year of data available for most of these metrics, and so we end at 2022. We update this. It tends to be annually, but we update this as these metrics become available again. So I just wanted to mention that in case anyone was wondering why we stopped at 2022. So 2 more tabs here. Again, in the health tab, several metrics included. And this is a tab which primarily comes from the Census Bureau data. We have percent uninsured as an example, percent living with independent living difficulty, with a vision disability, et cetera. And just to zoom in on an example again, you can see the percent uninsured in this geography as compared to the state average. And I should also mention, even though I promised not to be too much of a data nerd, here I go. But so I just want to make sure that I'm acknowledging that some of these axes are kind of zoomed in, right? So we're not necessarily always starting at 0 or ending at 50 or 100 on the left side here. I just want to mention we're doing that just for clarity, for visual clarity, so everyone can kind of see this. And I just want to acknowledge that so that it doesn't look like we're sort of misrepresenting the numbers or data in any sort of way. And then finally, the housing tab. Again, this primarily comes from Census Bureau data as well. Measures included on this are examples are median rent, median home value, percent with internet, just to pull out a few. And finally, as I've done with the others, just to give an example of median home value in that District 34 as compared to the average for the Commonwealth. So I sped through that. I know I wanted to give you an overview of that dashboard as an example of a tool that we have. Dr. Kelly is going to talk about another, I hope, relevant tool, which is, I shouldn't say this, but it's one of my favorite reports that we do, called the Kentucky Commuting Patterns Report.
Okay, you guys can hear me? Okay, great. So Kentucky Commuting Patterns Report, this was actually more of in a response to getting a lot of data requests. So again, just like the dashboard that Dr. Berry just showed, this is all actually not our data. We do have our own data sometimes, I promise, but this is packaged data from the Census Bureau, in particular the LEHD Occupational Destination Employment Statistics. So there's QR code there if you want to look at it too. But it is what it says. It is about Kentucky commuting patterns, and it wanted to be a very Kentucky-specific product. So everything that you see here, you can go to the Census Bureau's website and the On the Map tool and find everything. We just wanted to package it for people of the Commonwealth. So what this is doing is it's looking at jobs that people commute for, and you can go through and look by county. So for example, I live in Fayette County, so pull up Fayette County here, and we can see across the top, the yellow, those are people that are commuting in to Fayette County from other counties. So you're going to have your top 9 plus all other counties, and these are counties not just in Kentucky. It could be across the border or something like that. So we've got 96,000 people that are commuting into Fayette County to work. And then there are 84,000 jobs in Fayette County that are for someone that lives there, right? So that's the green part. So we've got 96,000 coming in, 84,000 that are living and working, and then we've got 43,000 people leaving. So for example, I commute to Franklin County, so I would be represented by that fourth line down at the bottom to the blue. My husband works in Danville, so he is in the all other counties over there because Boyle County doesn't appear. It's not in the top 10. So we can end up seeing, okay, we've got more people commuting in to work in Fayette County than live there and work, and we actually have more people living and working there than are leaving. So the other part of this page that you could look at would be at the bottom. There'd be additional information about sort of types of jobs where this is happening. So we could look at all jobs and where that breakdown is between people commuting in, people commuting out, and people that are living and working in the county. But we can break that down into type of industry of job, and we can also into the wage, low wage, middle wage, and high wage, okay? And then just break that down out by commuters. So I said Fayette County. Fayette County's right in the middle of the state. It might be a bigger, it's a bigger area population, but we might want something different, like what if we live near the border? So we could do something like look at Kenton County. So if we do the same thing for Kenton County, we can see now we've got at the top across the yellow, those are counties that are commuting into Kenton County. There are 40,000 jobs where this is happening. The number one county is Boone, right next door, but then we've also got Hamilton County, Ohio, across the river, and so you can see these sorts of patterns. So we've got 40,000 jobs that are commuting in, 21,000 that are living and working in Kenton County, and then we've got 56,000 that are leaving, and if you go through there and count, I think there are 5 counties that are actually in Ohio that people are commuting to. So maybe not surprising, but just so that we can actually see those patterns. And we could do the same thing again about saying, okay, well, what are the types of jobs that this is occurring, and what industries are they in, and what wages there are. So this one's just kind of fun to like dig into because you're comfortable with those areas, and you say, okay, what is really going on? There's one more page on the report, and this part is actually saying, let's actually break that down. What % of people are actually living and working? So I picked up Fayette County before. 66% of people in Fayette County live and work in Fayette County. Okay, and these are our workers here, and we can also do this by the same local workforce area also. So pretty straightforward. I'm going to let Matt tell you about a third report that we have that also could have some good information for you.
And I'll also mention relative to the commuting patterns report, when you look at a graph like this, it's a little busy, but we make these very interactive. So, if you're using this, if you're actually engaging with this tool, you can sort of hover over these and the information will pop up. So we really try to make this interactive for the user. So just to note that there's a lot in there, but we really do try to make it understandable to the best of our ability. And so as Beth said, the last report that we wanted to show you is an overview. Now, these are our data, so we don't have to give you the Census Bureau caveat this time. This is the Occupational Outlook tool. This is a couple of notes about sort of what this tool is and is not. So at its core, what the Occupational Outlook is a forecast of how the state's occupations are going to develop based on historic data. So we sort of take a look back to look forward and project. In this case, we're looking 2021 to 2031, so it's a 10-year projection. I do want to note that in terms of what this does not include, so that's what it is, and then what it does not include, just to be clear, the projections do not try to predict business cycles or recessions. And so when we're looking out at the 10-year period, in essence, what we're doing is sort of looking at a similar business cycle period in 10 years. So just to note that we're not trying to model in any disruptions or any sort of particular area of growth or type of growth or anything of that nature. So this is just really looking at the occupation specific. And then the last thing is you'll when I move forward, you'll see some specific numbers. We're not really actually trying to project 10 years into the future to the specific number of occupation. These are modeled estimates. So we're landing on a number, yes, but we don't claim to be quite that accurate. So just to be really clear about that. And then again, just like we've done with the other tools, just to give a quick overview of what the Occupational Outlook is and how it functions, as a tool. So this is the overview tab. There are only 2 tabs on this, but a lot of data that goes into it. The top of the overview tab is total openings by local workforce area, and then you can see the bar graph right below that, and I should say total projected openings, by local workforce area. And then the bar graph right below that sort of breaks out how those openings are categorized. And there are definitions included in this for exits, transfers, and then change. Which sort of at its most basic level, exits are individuals leaving the occupation, or the occupation transfers, are those changing occupations, and then change is sort of a general change to the occupations themselves. So in this case, it would look like growth, and then that totals to, and then we move into total openings. I should also note that, again, even though it's in the title, I like to be clear that these are jobs or occupations. And not individuals. And so I just want to be really clear about that data note. And then moving sort of the other piece of this overview tab, again, as I said, we'd like to make this as interactive as possible. And so what we do is we've added filters by educational attainment. So we move from no formal educational credential through master's degree or higher. And then we look at attainment percentage, earning more than, in this case, median income. And then we are able to look at the bottom there, top 5 openings by educational attainment. So again, we're trying to look at this as many ways as possible, but still remain easily interpretable. And just to give you an example of how you could sort of play with this tool, if you had a question, if you wanted to look at these openings by for those individuals with a high school diploma or equivalent and a bachelor's degree, if you wanted to sort of compare those two, we allow in this tool for that type of comparison. So this is an example of what that result would look like, just to give an example of how we could use it. And then this is the slide we have with the most numbers, the next two, and I apologize for that, but we just wanted to show sort of we get very granular in this tool, and we look all the way down at the occupation level, so that we can see all of the metrics included on that table for these specific occupations. And you can see what the table displays: estimated employment, change, median wage, et cetera. But we try to present as much information in this Outlook version as we possibly can. And then just to show the example of all the different ways that you can filter. In this example, we wanted to look at, if we just looked at for the entire state and for healthcare practitioner occupation group, what are the results there? And then we can filter the table in a lot of different ways. In this case, what we did is we sort of sorted by largest number of projected openings within that occupation group, and you can see what that would look like. You could do that for any of the metrics included here, again, with the purpose of showing in that 10-year period what the projections for that occupation group is. So I know we sped through that quite a bit. And again, these are just meant to be sort of overviews of the type of tools that we already have. But I want to say thank you for giving us that opportunity and for asking us to come and give you that information. And we will pause and end our presentation there.
Thank you, Dr. Berry. Thank you, Dr. Kelly. I think we do have a question, Representative Bratcher.
Well, what is the website again? I'm blown away by all this. I had no idea that you all did this, went this deep.
Thank you for that question. And our marketing director is probably back there mad at me for not having already said that. So thank you for saving me. It's kystats.ky.gov.
So it's what's on the QR code.
Yes, sir.
But when I bring it up, it goes to a different place. Is there just like a home page where it's like, this is all the stuff you can, like a splash page?
Absolutely, yeah. I'm sorry. That's for our mailing list. I apologize. You're right. That QR code is for the mailing list.
The other QR codes were for the individual.
Yeah, and the other would take you right to those reports. You're exactly right. So the kystats.ky.gov, is our home page, and that'll take you to everything we have, and it'll show you, you'll be able to choose reports if you'd like, or any of the other information that we produce.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, we have Wendy Smith with the Kentucky Housing Corporation. If you could please introduce yourself, both introduce yourselves and make sure that your microphone is on.
How about that? Very good. I'm rarely told that I'm not loud enough, so. And I'm going to ask Chris to tell me, I think I see our, yes, very good. So again, oh, that's not. There we go. I want to thank you all for inviting us. I'm imagining the creation of this task force was born out of you hearing from lots of constituents about the struggles they're having around housing in their communities. we too are hearing that, and hearing that from partners that we don't typically hear that from, and experiencing it in some pretty dramatic ways in the programs that we do administer at Kentucky Housing. So this is also pretty timely because we have just released phase 1 of what we call the housing supply gap analysis, and in August we'll release phase 2. So I'm going to share with you a framework of how we're thinking about this and the data. You all have a binder, each of you, that has our full phase 1 report in it, as well as a printout of this PowerPoint, just so you have that to take with you. There are lots of links and lots of tables and all that kind of stuff. So again, thank you so much for having us today. So just a little bit about Kentucky Housing Corporation. Our mission is affordable housing for communities and families across Kentucky. We are what's called a state housing finance agency. Every state has one. We have some authorities and abilities that really just belong to an organization with our identity. Kentucky only has one like us. We are self-supporting, so we are not in the state budget. We have to make our own money to pay for all of our operating costs. We do receive some federal allocations that would come to the state and come to KHC, and we administer it on behalf of the state. We make admin from that, but again, we are not part of the state budget. We have to kind of pay our own way and cover our own costs. And by that, we are quasi-governmental. We are administratively attached to the finance cabinet, but we do have a board of directors and are governed by that board of directors. So writ large, without going into much detail, basically what we do is we take in funding sources or different financing capabilities, bonds, tax credits, federal programs, mortgage finance money, private equity, and we invest that across the state. We rarely do that directly. Usually we are working with partners, mortgage companies, developers, for-profit and not-for-profit home builders, homeless services nonprofits across the state. It's a real range. So we usually are working in partnership, and often it's public-private. And without going into a lot of detail, which it would be required to share with you everything we say grace over, we work in primarily 3 areas. We work with home buyers and homeowners. So we do mortgages along with down payment assistance. Again, we do that with banks and mortgage companies. We don't directly work with the home buyer. We fund the mortgages through private entities across the state. We also do foreclosure prevention. We did it after the 2008 recession, and we've been doing it after the pandemic, basically to help Kentuckians keep their homes if they've hit financial hard times. We also fund home building. A lot of habitats across Kentucky receive funds from KHC to build houses, as do other nonprofits in the state. We fund home repair. It's a very modest amount of money, but it's typically $20,000 to $25,000, basically a roof, your HVAC system, some windows, aimed at keeping a home habitable, not full repair. And then we also do weatherization across Kentucky through community action agencies to bring the utility bill down. That's often the quickest and least expensive way to make a home more affordable for a low-income household that owns their home. The second big bucket of what we do is rental housing. We fund the development or the renovation, we call that preservation, of affordable rental units all across Kentucky, usually with tax credits that are funded with private equity. So that's not a HUD program, that's a Treasury IRS program. But we also, in addition to the development of rental units, we fund rent assistance through several HUD programs to over 27,000 units every month. So 27,000 households across the state, 109 counties, get a part of their rent subsidized via a KHC administered program. The third bucket of what we do are homeless programs. So we fund and do data collection and training for homeless programs across 118 counties. HUD requires, to compete for their funding, that you form what's called a continuum of care. It is a collection or a system of your shelter providers, your service providers, even sometimes local law enforcement is involved, healthcare sometimes is involved. In Kentucky, there are 3 continua of care: Louisville, Lexington, and the rest of the state, 118 counties. So we are the kind of administrating agency that does planning. We compete for money from HUD for that. And then we oversee programs that fund shelter, rapid rehousing, services, street outreach, all that kind of stuff. what I'm mainly trying to get across to you with this is we experience a wide spectrum of how Kentuckians are trying to obtain housing or move up into a better apartment or become a homeowner, keep the house that they have, lots of different elements across the housing, spectrum. Just a few pictures to give you some examples. So we funded 15 new homes in Perry County. This is on the edge of Hazard, developed by a nonprofit called Housing Development Alliance. We often do apartments. So the top picture is a large senior apartment complex developed by Episcopal Retirement Services in northern Kentucky. And then the bottom is just a duplex built in Owsley County. And then these are some senior apartments in Bullitt County and in Shepherdsville that were developed by a private developer. Just a few examples to share with you all. Okay, I'd like to also share with you a little bit of what we're seeing in terms of trends in homelessness. We just did data collection. We do it every year along with the Louisville and Lexington Homelessness Continuum of Care. And we have the aggregate statewide data that's just been compiled and cleaned for homeless data. Just going to share a couple metrics for you all. I'm sure that for some of you, you've heard, as KHC has, even from rural communities, that their sense of visible homelessness they're seeing in their community is on the rise. I know this has been an issue in Louisville and Lexington for sure, but we're even hearing about it in rural communities that maybe thought they didn't have a whole lot of street homelessness, that they're starting to see it more. So this data kind of shows you what's happened with the numbers. So we're going from 2019 to 2024. This data is collected in January every year. It's a required count by HUD, happens all across the country. 2021 is an aberration, so I'd like you to ignore those numbers. That was pandemic, and we actually didn't do a count. Louisville and Lexington did, but we didn't for the balance of state, so that number is very skewed. We did count people in shelters, but not street homelessness. So this is total homelessness count. This means this is people who are in a shelter or street homeless that we could find on one day and count. So it's always an undercount, but it is a consistent count over time. So what you can see is that 2024, the levels are higher than they have ever been. When we divide this out into folks who are actually in shelter, they do have a shelter bed to sleep in. What you can see is that the numbers have rebounded back to basically 2019 levels. They're not radically higher, but they are higher in some cases between the three continuums of care, again, Lexington, Louisville, and the balance of state. What's most dramatic is when you look at what's called unsheltered homelessness. These are folks we counted on the street on one night in January across the state. And what you can see is that for all three areas, all three continuums of care, the 2024 unsheltered or street homeless count, if you would, has really gone up, in particular for the balance of state. So everywhere but Louisville and Lexington is what's included in that. We have seen a significant increase. We are seeing a significant increase in these numbers in what is called first-time homelessness, which is often an indicator of a market problem. The market has gotten so expensive, more people are experiencing homelessness for the first time, versus some folks are in and out of homelessness pretty recurringly, and their needs are pretty unique, and it can be really hard to get them the kind of services and shelter that they need. First-time homelessness is worrisome. We're also seeing an increase in people who are employed and homeless. These are indicators of a market that is just getting so expensive, or there's just a scarcity of units. So one of the things that we talk a lot about at Kentucky Housing is the idea that we should think about homelessness or housing instability or housing affordability with a musical chairs analogy. So imagine you have 10 people playing musical chairs. One person is on crutches. 10 people, you have 9 chairs. When the music stops, the person who will not find a chair is the person on crutches, right? They're going to be slower. It's harder for them to move around. Is it because of the crutches, or is it because there weren't enough chairs? And I would encourage you all to think about this as a supply issue and less a crutches issue. And I'll get at what I mean by that. So the structural causes for homelessness or housing instability or housing inaffordability, housing issues, is insufficient supply. That's the structural issue, particularly when that insufficient supply happens alongside economic growth population growth, and lack of construction. Now, there are contributing causes that might make an individual or a family more likely to experience homelessness, housing instability, or housing inaffordability. Things like substance use disorder, mental illness, an eviction, a job loss, divorce, or a domestic split. Those are contributing factors, but they don't always dictate that a person or a family ends up homeless. The structural factors is the environment in which a contributing factor is more likely to make you homeless, if you have one or more of these. So I really want to encourage y'all to think about supply, because that is what we are experiencing at KHC, is that we are facing a supply issue, and we have never seen an issue tie people who are working in homelessness all the way through to people who are in mortgage lending and real estate. We are seeing everyone talking about a common issue. That's pretty much never happened in my nearly 30-year career. So one of the things that we are also really trying to frame this as is the housing continuum, or if you will, the housing market. We say continuum, but really it is all about the housing market. So you could look all the way at the far end where it's pink, people who are experiencing homelessness, they're in shelters or they're in a car, they're living on the streets. All the way at the other end is market rate home ownership. People who are doing great, building equity, they own their home. In between, there are different levels and types of housing for different people at different incomes, right? So people experiencing homelessness, particularly chronically homeless, they need potentially supportive housing, that yellow or that light green, just affordable rental housing, something that's affordable to them. Once they could get that, they can maintain their job and they could survive. Some people are looking for an affordable home ownership option, which just means home ownership that they can afford. It's not even necessarily subsidized. It's just a home they can afford to buy. And then you've got market rate rental. So that might be professionals, young professionals. They don't want to own a home, and they can pay quite a bit for rent, all the way up then to market rate home ownership. What we're seeing is when there are gaps along this continuum, or gaps in the marketplace, where there's not an alignment between income and demand and what the supply offers, we are seeing kind of gluts and problems. Here's an example of one where it's not even about people being impoverished. We have a lot of older homeowners who might be interested in downsizing, but in a lot of rural communities, there's not a downsizing option. There's not a condo, there's not an assisted living, or just something that they're interested in owning. And their interest rate right now on their current mortgage is so very low, it's not a good economic decision for them to move, or they own the home outright. And it would cost them so much, even if they were to sell that home, to buy a new, smaller home, it's just not a good economic decision. So we have a glut in the marketplace, and that's not born out of anybody being in economic strife. It's just a glut in the market, a stuck point, if you will. However, what we are seeing at KHC is folks who need, let's say, the yellow, light green, and darker green shades. So they need supportive housing, they need an affordable rental, or they just want to buy a small home. They are priced out of the market right now because folks who might be interested in the higher end housing on the continuum can't find what they want. So they're choosing their option B, a smaller home, a smaller apartment, which then means the person who would have been able to afford that has to go down. And who loses out on that? It's the person with the fewest resources or the most barriers, the person with the crutches, if you will. So if you have an eviction, if you've got bad credit, if you've got a substance use disorder, whatever, you're more likely to then not win out in the scarcity of housing units. Okay, I feel like I've hit all that. So KHC released on April 16th the Kentucky Housing Supply Gap Analysis, Phase 1. Again, you all have the full report, and Phase 2 is coming in August. We did this for really two big reasons. The first is our own programs that we say grace over are having problems because of the housing supply shortage. And I'll give you a few examples. We have moderate income prospective homebuyers who get approved for, let's say, a loan for $150,000, which used to buy you a home, and they cannot find a home to buy. I would say if we could get some homes from 150 to 250, just about anywhere in Kentucky, it would be great. There are so many home buyers who would like to buy and cannot. We also have very low income tenants, some who are experiencing homelessness, who get a rent voucher either through homeless programs or Section 8, and they search for a unit and they cannot find one. And they end up timing out. We're only allowed to let them look for so long. The minimum time we give a tenant is 120 days. And we're going to pay all of their rent except for 30% of their income. They cannot find a unit. We give them 150 days. We can go up to 210 days on some of our vouchers. They time out, and they must, by regulation, turn that voucher back in, go to the bottom of the waiting list. That is so demoralizing for my staff and for that tenant, any social workers who are working with them to try to help them find housing. We are also seeing, again, that homelessness number increase, particularly street homelessness and first-time homelessness. Lastly, we are seeing middle, moderate, and low-income households competing for the very same units, particularly rental units. So that's just driving those rental costs up. The second big reason that we did the housing supply gap analysis is we are hearing from leaders and partners who we don't typically have a relationship with. We don't work with them in our day-to-day programs. They are calling us, wanting to talk to us, wanting to problem solve, and they're not folks that we have typically worked with just because our programs don't usually connect. So this is not the full list, but this is a good list. The Kentucky League of Cities, the Home Builders Association of Kentucky, the Economic Development Cabinet, the I-71 Economic Development Alliance, Eastern Kentucky's Leadership Foundation. I've spoken several times at the DLG Local Issues Conference with local officials, Rotary clubs, just all kinds of folks, ad districts. They are coming to us wanting to know, and we're faced with this issue of, we could encourage them to apply to our programs, but all that is doing is taking the same pie and prospectively slicing it into smaller slices because our dollars aren't bigger. So, we could encourage them to apply for our funding, but it just means more folks competing for the exact same, resources. So, what factors are at play that are creating the gap? I am going to share with you all the numbers, but I want to help frame what has led us as a state, but really as a country. This is a nationwide issue, not just a Kentucky issue. What factors are at play? One factor is natural disasters, right? The tornadoes in West Kentucky and the flooding in East Kentucky have caused us to lose roughly 5,000 units. Now, some of those will be rebuilt, but not all. This is the number that were majorly damaged or fully destroyed. Just as a related issue, what you all probably are aware of or will soon be is that we are facing home insurance costs that are about to skyrocket. They are going up and they are going to get even worse. This is data from AM Best, it was reported by the New York Times, of the profitability for homeowners insurance companies like State Farm of doing work in Kentucky. So what you can see is that for many years it was profitable to sell homeowners insurance in Kentucky. The two red years represent the tornadoes and the flooding. And what you can probably tell spatially is that the two red years have almost canceled out all of the green profitable years. So homeowners insurance is going up, as is insurance for rental properties. We're hearing this a lot. Another factor at play is economic growth. This is a great story that gives me a pit in my stomach every time I hear about more jobs being announced. We have had probably some of the top last 3 years of economic growth in Kentucky, which is great. However, we need new housing supply alongside that economic growth. Without more housing, the Kentuckians that have fewer resources are going to risk housing instability and homelessness. So I'm not as worried about the newcomers who get jobs at the new Blue Oval plant or somewhere else being able to find housing. They will eventually because they'll have the resources, but there will be a filtering out where there will be Kentuckians, probably folks who always live there and work in service jobs or are living on Social Security, who will lose out. Another factor at play is local resistance. This isn't everywhere because not everywhere in our state has zoning and land use regulations. I live in Marion County, a couple houses down from Senator Higdon, and our town has zoning, but our county does not. So while this is an issue, it does not explain the whole statewide housing supply gap. But there are parts of the state, particularly our more urbanized areas, that do have zoning, land use, and other issues that really make it hard to build denser, to build smaller homes, to build rental. It really faces a lot of obstacles. We also, and this is a big issue, and you'll see this in a couple of charts I'm going to show you in a second. Since the 2008 housing crisis and following recession, we lost a dramatic amount of builder and contractor capacity to build housing in Kentucky and the U.S. And we have not rebounded from the 2008 recession. I have to say at KHC, we have felt, it's kind of an aha/duh moment for us, like we weren't watching this. after the '08 recession. We were so busy scurrying, trying to recover from it, we weren't watching how much builder capacity we had lost. And it's really hard for your small builders, who did the lion's share of construction in rural Kentucky. They got out of business. They haven't gotten back into it. If they're even trying, it's hard for them to get access to lending, to the credit needed to build more than 1 or 2 houses at a time, and just to get land without having to hold those costs and pay interest on that for a long, long time. So here are a few charts to show you this. Now, this is for the U.S., not just for Kentucky. This is housing starts over time. So the large blue mass are single-family homes. What you see is that around '08, the number of housing starts tanked for all areas. Blue is single-family, yellow is multifamily apartments, and then the black is manufactured homes. So we lost a ton of capacity when that '08 crisis hit, and we have not rebounded even to 2006 levels. This was pretty stark to me when I saw this. Likewise, our construction workforce has not rebounded since the '08 recession. When you lose a lot of builder capacity, you're going to have that workforce shrink, and that workforce has not rebounded. It is still not even the same share of our overall workforce that it was in 2007. So this is a big contributing factor. The other part that's missing is we are no longer constructing very much of what is called missing middle housing, which means a duplex, a triplex, a tenplex, small townhomes. They're denser, but it used to be in older neighborhoods, you might have 5 single-family homes and 2 apartment buildings. And it added some density, but it didn't radically change the nature of that residential neighborhood. In fact, when you have this kind of density, it supports your neighborhood business districts really well, because you got more rooftops, more households to go to the grocery, to go to the restaurant, to shop in the shops. Most of our zoning for newer developments expressly disallow this kind of density to be mixed in with single-family homes. We're in a kind of an either-or situation. You're either building an apartment complex or you're building single-family homes, nothing in between. And this is a great way to get more density without really changing the complexion of a neighborhood. So this is a graph that shows you the volume of middle housing, but that image that I just showed you, how much are we building in the U.S.? And so after '08, what you will see, the black line is single-family homes, tanked in '08. The orange line is apartment buildings, also went down after the '08 recession. The blue-green line is that middle housing, duplexes, quadplexes, tris, all that kind of stuff. So what you'll see is nothing has rebounded to pre-'08 levels, but single-family housing is going back up, apartments are going back up, missing middle has almost zeroed out. We're doing just about none of it as a country. And then lastly, I thought I would share with you all a graphic of home starts to construct smaller homes. And so we're using the metric of 1,400 square feet or smaller, so a modest starter home, that would be relatively affordable. And what you can see is that has just consistently gone down, not even due to the recession, really. This is just, there has been an appetite for larger homes. As interest rates have been low, purchasing power is up, there's a desire for a larger house. What we're seeing now is homebuyers who would buy a 1,400 square foot home if it were available, at a reasonable price. Okay, high interest rates goes along with this. It diminishes a homebuyer's purchase power. It's no surprise to anybody. It keeps homes off the market. As I mentioned, we have a lot of folks who have a 2 or 3% mortgage. They're not going anywhere, and you can't blame them. The high interest rates limits a home builder's ability to obtain credit or obtain enough to build more homes at once, because that interest burden is just so high. If they can get the loan at all from the bank, it's going to cost them so much. And then we're seeing when we allocate tax credits or other dollars to build larger affordable complexes, we're seeing the interest cost so high that is creating new gaps in projects. Sometimes $500,000, $1 million of gap needed because the interest cost is so high, because right now rates are just so very high. Another issue is the slow delivery of units to market. As a country and as a state, we do not build very fast. It takes a long time for housing to get built. Part of it is that builders have to navigate just being able to find land to buy and getting the money to buy it, zoning approvals, site development costs, all that kind of stuff. Most housing in Kentucky is still stick-built, We need build-ready sites that already have infrastructure and roads, and they're just ready for builders to put houses on. That'd be great. Just like we do industrial parks, we need housing parks ready to be built on. We also need advancement in how we build houses. So things like modular, panelized, manufactured homes. I'm not saying instead of stick-built, I'm saying in addition. We kind of need all options on deck to get more built. And I think this is my last factor at play, which is a stagnant funding landscape in terms of affordable housing. This table, I won't go through it. It's mainly just to show you the dollars that come from HUD year over year to Kentucky Housing Corporation and to Department for Local Government that can go to housing. And what you'll see is basically there hasn't been a significant increase. And in fact, in this last year, we have experienced in one of our key programs, a 20% decrease. Overall, it's a 7% decrease in all funds coming from HUD. So at a time where we have this supply gap, our dollars are going down. Okay, and we have few resources in that funding landscape to fund that missing middle housing. Everything KHC gets really funds mainly single-family homes or large complexes. We don't have a lot of tools, and we can go into that another time, that really make it worthwhile to use our sources for a triplex, a quadplex, even a 10-plex. We also don't have very many sources that can help with middle income housing, workforce housing, folks who are not low income, but are having a hard time affording housing right now. Okay, so let's get into the findings of our supply gap. And again, I'm not going to go through this in excruciating detail. You all have the full report. It's online. The raw data is available. We can get you whatever you want. And we have a phase 2 coming in August. So we competitively procured a market research firm out of Columbus, Ohio called Bowen National Research. They've done a lot of regional studies. They did one recently for Bowling Green. They're doing one for Owensboro. They're very acquainted with the Kentucky kind of marketplace and dynamics. And so this is their analysis. The methodology is in detail, and the county by county data is in the back of the report we have provided. But overall, the number of housing units currently needed in Kentucky is 206,000. This is not affordable units, and these are not just units for low-income Kentuckians. What is probably kind of hard to see, but might be easier if you look at the printed slide, is that we broke this into rental, which is that top level, 101,000 units roughly needed in rental, 104 units roughly needed in forced sale or home ownership options. And then we broke them down across different income levels. 30% area median income and below are extremely poor below-income Kentuckians. 31 to 50% are folks who are working but not making very much. 51 to 80%, that's workforce housing, that's moderate income folks. 81% to 120% area median income, that's your folks who, they've got a little bit to work with, they could probably buy a house if they could find one that's affordable. And then you go up from there. What you can see is that the gap is spread across rental and home ownership and every income level. For rental, the greater need is for low-income folks, but for home ownership, it's almost evenly split across the income levels. I want to underline that. For home ownership, almost every income band has a shortage of housing. So again, this is our phase 1. In August, we will have a phase 2. The phase 2 will be a 5-year projection based on migration patterns, job announcements and expansions, as well as housing starts data. So we want to account for what's being built right now. Also in the report is a whole lot of data that I'm not going to go over today. This is just a list of all of the data and maps that you can find in the report, because I was asked to bring demographic information so you can get county by county information about population, households, renter rate, home ownership rate, housing cost burden, all that kind of stuff. It's in there. Okay, so here is a key metric that I think you all should probably pay attention to, which is what is called severe cost burden. Severe cost burden is defined as households spending 50% of their income on housing. I want to pause there. 50% of their income goes to their housing. That means that's before taxes. So that means they have 50% left for everything else. When you are severely cost burdened, you are highly at risk of losing your home or your apartment, or eventually becoming homeless. So what you can see here is the severe housing cost burden, the percent of renters in this map, county by county. And what you'll see, it's all over the state. It's not an urban issue, it's not a rural issue. It is many, many parts of the state that have severe housing cost burden. This is the severe housing cost burden for homeowners across the state. So what you will see also here is that, again, it is not an urban or rural issue. It is happening all across the state. Another thing that we looked at was, what is the share of vacant rental housing that's available? And again, we used not just total vacancy, because total vacancy can include units that will never house a household because they are substandard, they're vacant, they're in foreclosure or tied up in heirship disputes, or it's a Airbnb, VRBO, and it's a short-term rental, and it will never house a resident family. So we cleaned that out. And what you see here are the rental housing vacancy across the state. You need at least 4% to have enough slack in your rental market for people to move in and out. And what we see in many counties is there's well below 4%, meaning there's a real shortage of available rental. Similarly, the available for sale housing, this is the percentage of for sale units, of homeownership units that are available and for sale. You need at least 2% to have enough slack in your homeownership market. And what we see here is that many, many counties are well below 2% in available homeownership units that are for sale. When you look at the overall gap, again, it does skew to the lower income folks. Again, these percentages at the bottom of the bars are percent of area median income that the household earns. So what you see is the greatest need is the poorest Kentuckians. That's not a huge surprise. But what was a surprise to us is that even as you go up the income levels, there is still a need for more housing to be built. When you break it into renters, which is on, I don't know which, on your left, the rental gap is primarily low-income renters. It's primarily the folks we serve at Kentucky Housing Corporation, which tend to be 80% of area median income and below. But when you look at for sale, again, that chart is pretty much an even number across every income band, meaning the for sale need crosses a lot of different income ranges. Okay, so this map shows you, in terms of sheer numbers, the overall housing gap by county. It's not going to be a surprise to anyone that Louisville, Lexington, and Northern Kentucky, and then Bowling Green to a slightly lesser extent, really, top the list in terms of sheer numbers. And this is good, but really what we wanted to do was to look at the need for housing as a share of the units in that county to get a sense of the magnitude of the gap. And that's what this map is. This map is showing you the number of units needed compared to the number of units that are in that county. And it tells a very different story where it's not just aggregated to our most urbanized area, it's all across the state. I think there are a lot of folks who might think rural areas don't have a housing crisis, and I can tell you I am hearing from so many rural county judge executives and other leaders that they have a real need for more housing. When we look at that gap broken out by renters, so this is the sheer number of rental gap needed county by county. Again, the urbanized areas are most represented. But then when we do that as a share of the rental units in that county, you will see many more counties, many more rural counties in particular, become that dark blue, meaning they really need more housing. And as a share of their existing housing, it's a very high number that they need. Similarly, we did this for sale housing. So this is the sheer number for sale units needed. Again, urban areas are lighting up. But then when we look at the needed number of home ownership units compared to the existing home ownership units, you will again see it lights up a lot more counties, and many more rural counties really need some home ownership units built. We then collected the data and aggregated it into area development district just to try to get some regionalization, because we have a lot of counties in our state, right? And that gets pretty messy when you're trying to look at it. So we did try to look at this, by area development district just to get a picture of it. Not going to surprise you all that Northern Kentucky, Lexington, and the Louisville region are really where the biggest, numbers are. But the numbers are not small in the other ad districts. They are significant, particularly compared to their population. And then, my apologies, that's rental, and then this is home ownership. So it's a similar story. There is need in every part of Kentucky. So to frame the issue, I'll share with you how Kentucky Housing is thinking about this. In our view, the housing supply shortage is Kentucky's most urgent issue. I'm an affordable housing professional. I am not here to ask you all to invest more money in just affordable housing. I do not think that is the solution that Kentucky needs, because what we're seeing is while Kentucky Housing for 50 plus years has been investing in affordable housing, because there's not enough supply in the overall marketplace, we're losing ground in serving the folks we try to serve. The overall marketplace needs more housing, and we need kind of a systematic approach that helps Kentucky be able to build and get brought to market more housing to meet our economic and population growth. All of our counties need housing. If we had enough supply, not even affordable, just enough supply, Kentucky would have lower average housing costs. Supply will bring down costs. That's economics, right? We would have higher home ownership rates. We would have more workforce housing if we just had more supply. We would have lower eviction rates. We would have fewer homeless Kentuckians, and we'd have increased household stability. Because if we could just get more units, even for the higher income people that are looking for something and picking their option B or C, if they can get what they want, folks with less means will have more options open to them, because it is a marketplace, because it is a continuum. We also want to make sure that we get across, as you all know, housing is key to economic development. We, as a staff, read a book last year, and one of the quotes in it I can't share enough, which is, homes are where jobs go to sleep at night. If you want jobs, you need homes. And I think that's part of why we are hearing so much from economic development entities. So my ask to you all would be to really try to avoid getting distracted by niche or secondary housing issues and focus on the supply. I keep saying to my staff, if we're not talking about supply, we're probably talking about the wrong thing right now, because we as an organization haven't had our eye on that, on the overall supply. We've just been focused on what we do, and now the folks we serve are really struggling, in part as a result. Again, I can't stress enough, homes are where jobs go to sleep at night. The housing supply gap data is available online. You all have the full report, but our website has visualizations. You can download an Excel of all the data, whatever you want. And then we will release that phase 2, which is a 5-year projection based on migration, housing starts, and job growth, county by county. So it'll be similar data, but a 5-year projection. That'll be in August at our conference. We would be happy to comp any of you all to come to that, but we'd also be happy to come back and present anything that you'd like. Thank you all very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Smith. I do have a quick question, and just to clarify, just to help me, and I think maybe some other people understand. When we were talking about the homeless number, and that was a little over 5,000 across Kentucky on any given night. And then you tell us that we're 206,000 units short. Help me understand, where are those people now?
Yes. So they are people who are spending 50% of their income on housing. They are people doubled up. We have a lot of households living together because they can't afford. They are people who are wanting to start their own household but living with their parents because they cannot find a home to buy or an apartment that they can, afford. So there's a lot of overcrowding. Some of that is by choice, like they have decided to do that in the interim, So it is people living in an apartment they don't want to live in. So a traveling nurse who is living in a C quality apartment wants an A quality apartment. So the 200,000 isn't meant to mean we have 200,000 people homeless. It's people who are not in a housing solution matched to what they want, to their income, or where they want to live. People doing extremely long commutes, that kind of stuff. If you would like me to come back and go through the data or bring our market analyst to kind of explain how he arrived at that, we would be happy to do that.
Thank you. I just want to make sure that the number that we're looking at is a real number.
Yeah.
I'm sure there are a lot of people that live in a house that they would rather they would rather live in a different zip code or have a bigger house. I don't know if that's what I would consider a housing crisis. And so I just don't want to conflate those numbers together.
My only point would be, you all are here to address the housing crisis. I would imagine you also have in mind economic vibrancy and long-term growth. And if our markets don't have enough housing for middle and upper income folks, it might be hard for them to recruit the workforce that they want.
Thank you. Gosh, that was a lot. I mean, I thought I had a question on page 2, and then at page 10, I had another question, then another question. But this is a lot to absorb, and I like how you framed everything, that it's a supply issue. And I wish it was almost as simplistic as just being a supply issue. But as you know, there's just so much that goes into that supply. One of the things that I thought was really interesting, that I didn't know how to talk about it, but you put it in much better terms, and that is the severe cost burden. Mm-hmm. Is it sometimes that we approve projects in places that are not necessarily appropriate, that would impose that severe cost burden on that person that needed that affordable unit mm-hmm. or that affordable home ownership. And so, I kind of go back to, I've been reading a lot about what Detroit has been doing. And Detroit, for the first time, has added numbers to their metropolitan area. And how did they add numbers to their metropolitan area? They looked at sites that were already ready to go. They already had the infrastructure there. They already had all of the sewer lines, everything. And they rebuilt those areas, part of the metropolitan area. And in everything that I've read, they've done it block by block by block. And they really stabilized a huge portion of their metropolitan area. But they had a site ready to go that didn't add that severe cost burden to that demographic. Mm-hmm. And so I appreciate those slides, because I think that needs to be really at the forefront. That are we just approving plans that, just to get units online, or are we setting people up for failure? And so that was a really great slide. And I know as we go through this also, this missing middle housing, one of the parts of Louisville that I represent has an incredible mixed use development. It's called Norton Commons. They have $2 million homes, and they have apartments. They have duplexes. They have condos. It's an extraordinary community. And so and everybody lives harmoniously out there. And you have high income, and then you have some people that are, just got their first job out of college. So I think those kinds of development plans are really exciting, because you can get people into that system. So
I agree with you, and I think we're hearing more and more from leaders about how they're concerned about younger generations being able to get a foothold in their mm-hmm. communities, whether it's a rental or a ownership option, and that a community like that, or a rural version of it, might be more appealing to some communities than it used to be. Yes.
So like I said, this is a lot to digest, but I really appreciate some of the terminology and some of the thoughts that you have given us to consider as we go through this. So thank you.
Representative Bratcher.
I just trying to catch up here, because this is some of this is new to me. Would you say, is it fair to say that you guys are like a conduit of federal money coming in, and you decide where it goes? Is that simple form? Is that the way?
I wish it were that easy. Let me go back a few. Yeah, it's way back here. Apologize for all the scrolling.
I have a couple of questions, Chairwoman.
So it's not as simple as we do not decide where much of it goes, because it is already got a lot of restrictions on it. from the federal government. I'll give you an example of probably what's been our most successful in terms of generating rental housing units across Kentucky, and that's called the Low-Income Housing Tax Credit. It's not a HUD program. No money actually comes to KHC for that program. We get the right to allocate tax credits to projects. So every 2 years, we write a plan about how those tax credits will be allocated. And then developers submit applications about what they want to build where. And we score it and we award the tax credit. And then that developer can work with a syndicator or investors to get investors to buy those tax credits, which reduces their federal tax burden and brings equity to build the apartments. That equity does not have to be paid back. So it makes it so that the debt load is very low, and those apartments can be rented at a low rent for 30 years. So it offsets their need to make a profit, on the rents because they get the equity.
If I can do one more question, could you quickly go back to that Perry County development?
Yes.
I think it's page 3 or so.
Yeah.
So let's say, how did you all interact with that development?
Oh, great, I'm glad you asked that. So every year, Housing Development Alliance, which is the nonprofit developer of these homes in Perry County, every year we have different funds. There's the State Affordable Housing Trust Fund, and then the newer Rural Housing Trust Fund. We put out a notice of funds available, and for-profit and not-for-profit builders apply to us for the money. They say, I'd like to build 25 homes. Here's how much money I would like. They submit a pro forma and all of their organizational docs, and then we score them. We award them the money, and then as they start to build, they give us more detailed finances, and they use the money to build the houses. So they used our money to build these houses, and then the home buyers went and got a loan. Many of them could not, let's say it cost $200,000 to build the house, but the homeowner could afford a $140,000 mortgage. So there is a soft second mortgage that just sits there, doesn't have to be repaid so long as they live in the house, and that's our dollars that stay in there. Some of our dollars go to pay a developer fee to HDA so they can keep the lights on. Then some of the money revolves into building the next house. So they might get enough money that might look like it's enough to build 6 houses, but they can revolve it and build 10 houses, if that makes sense. They almost use it like a construction loan fund.
And one last one, Madam Chair. So don't take this the wrong way, because after listening to you for 30 minutes or so, I can tell your group is in good hands. I can tell that you really care about this. And then Jimmy over here said, don't you dare say anything against. But I've had some run-ins with KHC through the years, and I didn't like the way they operated. So this is my simple question. Who's watching the way you guys operate? Is there an oversight? And like, for example, in that there, I see a lot of concrete. Now, I'm just making this up out of thin blue air. What if there was a guy that said, buddy, you got this thing going on here, give me some extra concrete work? Now, I don't know if they need that big of a driveway for those houses or not, but who would stop something like that?
Do you mean watch their, the cost controls? Is that what you're getting
Exactly.
at? Okay.
Or any kind of,
Yeah.
the C word, corruption.
I'll give you a couple of levels of how we do oversight. So, we have a board, we have an internal audit team, we get an external audit every year, then HUD and different federal entities monitor us every year. So that happens. But then in terms of our dollars going to HDA, for every house that they build, they submit to us what's called a setup that lists all of their costs, construction, land work, masonry. It is line item by line item. They submit, here's what we propose for it to be. We have a design and construction team. They're certified building inspectors that inspect. They look at plans and they inspect on site. So when they want to draw funds from us, we send an inspector out to say, okay, yeah, they do have the footer in. They do have it framed up. They can draw those funds. And then they have to submit a when done setup, which is it automatically compares. Here's what they said it would cost. Here's what it actually did. They actually spent. What's the difference? And what's the explanation if the difference is more than 7 or 10%?
We've got 3 more questions, and I do ask that we try to keep it brief because we've got one more person that's testifying. Senator West.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Got a couple very quick questions. We've got this is not a new problem, right? I mean, it's been coming for a while. And this is a great report, by the way, very detailed, very encapsulated a lot of the problems. Could you comment briefly on the role of inflation? Like, what role has that played?
Well,
in this, obviously?
it is, we are seeing, I mean, this began during the pandemic with a lot of supply shortages, right? But it has kept going. We are seeing the cost of materials and labor in the construction and land go up all across the board. And so if our pot of money is actually getting a little smaller, from the federal government, we're making fewer units come to market with that amount of money because of the cost escalation. We're definitely seeing that.
So I was looking at it more from a private sector issue, so I'm going to ask you this question straightforward. So it's a big problem. You've shown us what the problem is. It's a huge problem. It's not a problem that KHC can solve. Is that a fair statement?
I totally agree with you.
Right,
Yes.
right. So,
I am not here to, I
Right.
think your solution may or may not have anything, long run to do with KHC's programs, but we care about it very
so
much.
any home that even KHC builds is a private sector contract.
Yes.
So the solution to this problem is in the private sector.
I would say a public-private kind of solution.
But a lot of it could be just private sector, right?
Theoretically, but it hasn't happened. So it seems like there might be some nudge that's needed,
Right. So is it the government's job always to provide the nudge? Or maybe we pull back some barriers that are on private individuals doing this kind of work.
Well, that's a kind of nudge. I mean, I would say that's a contributing effort. Yeah.
Okay. That's taken well. So what are some of those things we can do to remove some of those barriers to our private contractors and investors and builders to get more supply online?
So I'm probably going to mix. I hear what you're saying. You're wanting total kind of ways you all could just ease up to let the market do more.
The legislature.
Is what you're getting
Right.
at. And I honestly am not equipped to understand how the state legislature interacts with local land use. I don't know. That would help, but again, many counties don't have zoning, and so that's not they still have a gap, and that you're not gonna address that. The biggest thing I keep thinking about is when we want to incentivize economic development, we kind of meet the private market part of the way. Like in my county, we've done a lot of industrial parks, right? We don't build the factory for the company, but we build a road, our industrial foundation gets some sites ready with infrastructure, and then says, if you want to invest here, you can do it really quickly. And so to me, it's how can you reduce the kind of the holding cost or the cost to get ready to swing a hammer? How do you do that? And is it just aggregating available land? Does the state have land that's worth building on that could be made available? Flexible funding is a big issue. Our smaller contractors cannot access a lot of lending from the banks. The banks are more restricted and gun shy since 2008, particularly with your smaller builders. And that's a real barrier.
Thank you.
Senator Yates.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, thank you for being here. And I think my colleagues are absolutely correct. This is an issue. I came into local government in 2010, and I feel like this has been the continuous discussion. One thing that I think I'm going to ask for help for is we're looking to incentivize, when we talked about the private market, that we want to incentivize construction, we want to incentivize developers, and I kind of play around with real estate as well, but with now if you have an interest rate at 7 or 7.5%, and you were going to get a 10 cap on there, now you're looking at maybe a 7 cap or 6 cap. You're better off investing it somewhere else.
Yeah.
And so can you come into play, KHC come into play to be able to help that gap fill as far as incentives like we do with, like locally we do with Affordable Housing Trust Fund and those things? And so
I mean, we can, but we don't have any more to work with than we did before. So like some of our resources could do that, but and are doing that in some communities, but there's not any more to go around. Is all I'm, who we're going to take from, I guess, is where we're left, And
I think that's part of the reasons this committee is here today to try to talk about that. Because I think we talk about what incentivizes, what gets going, and obviously we're incentivizing job creation, but if the jobs have nowhere to go to sleep at night,
Yes,
and into it, and so it does make sense. It's just figuring out how the best way to get there. And talking to the chair before and some of my colleagues, looking at best practices, and that's what you bring to the table here. And so hopefully you'll have that update in August, and we can kind of maybe hopefully to be able to emulate that. In the meantime, though, if I'm having people watch, can they apply, like in Jefferson County, for instance? Would they, if they have a plan, if we have a property that we want to put
Yes.
a 20-plex,
Yeah, absolutely.
do there?
They can. Just go to kyhousing.org, or my this PowerPoint is on your task force webpage, and my contact information is in it. I would also add, I just put a sampling of what some other states have been doing to address their housing supply, not just affordable housing, but really workforce. And there are some examples of what Ohio's done, a homeownership tax credit at the state level. Oklahoma created a $200 million fund to incentivize more housing construction. So there are examples of what other states just in the last year or two have started doing.
And on that information, have you shown, because besides just the housing, how it's also shown to reduce intergenerational poverty and upward mobility and all those things? You have those stats as well, correct?
Well, we do for homeownership long-term or housing stability long-term, but in terms of what states are doing recently, of course, those are so recent we don't have any long-term data for that.
Thank you.
Representative Kleins.
And this will be quick. Thank you, Madam Chair. So speaking of the other states, is there a particular program in another state at this time that KHS or KHC is favoring more so than
I would
another?
like to ask for more time to look at them before coming to you all. I mean, I did include several. We have a longer list, but I would like time to research it because we are unique. We are more rural than some states. Oklahoma's is pretty interesting to me because I just met with them at a conference 2 weeks ago. But I'd love to dig into it more before landing somewhere on that.
Thank you.
And our final question is Senator Higdon.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Wendy, for that presentation. I guess as cost of building and supply, all the things that, one of the things that I guess works into this is smaller homes. We all used to want, the 4-bedroom, 3,000 square feet, and obviously that's not a starter home anymore. The tiny homes and those sorts of things had to play into this somewhere too, I think, because that would fit that very affordable type home. But one of the things that figures into the cost of owning a home or even rental is utility cost. I've seen utility costs, and for those folks, there's a lot of apartments that provide the utilities. Wasn't that many years ago that $150 a month would provide utilities. Now, if you can get it done for $300 a month, so that's a big part of the expense of owning or renting is utility costs. So the smaller and more efficient they are, the better. So I think that there's like I said, there's a lot of different spokes to this. It's no one thing can solve this problem. It's going to take a lot of different folks, like I said, a lot of partnerships, and the private sector really has to step up and start working on this. But it is a major issue, and thank you for being here today to help us understand how bad it really, or what the demand is for us to do something.
Appreciate it. Thanks, Jimmy.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Wendy. Our last person giving testimony is Max Fuller with the Department of Housing, Buildings, and Construction. As you come up, if you could both just introduce yourselves and make sure that the green light is on the microphone, please.
Good afternoon, and y'all. Okay. My name is Max Fuller. I'm the Commissioner of the Department of Housing, Buildings, and Construction. Joined today by Gary Feck. Gary, would you like to introduce yourself?
I'm with the Department of Housing, Buildings, and Construction, Director, Building Code Enforcement.
So I apologize. We don't have slides. We don't have handouts. But I can just about guarantee what we have is pretty brief. So hopefully we won't take up too much of your all's time. I do appreciate you all reaching out and asking us to speak today. And really what we want to give is just a brief kind of bird's eye overview of our agency, and to a lesser extent our local counterparts, because there are many of those throughout the Commonwealth. So the Department of Housing, Buildings, and Construction promulgates and enforces statewide construction standards. Excuse me. So the Kentucky Building Code, Kentucky Residential Code, Plumbing Code, all of that, those are codes that our agency promulgates through administrative regulation. We also have inspection, plan review, and permitting services through our agency. In the context of residential construction, we've really got three areas within our department that are touching new construction and renovation, and those are the divisions of Building Code Enforcement, the Division of Plumbing, and the Division of HVAC, Heating and Air. And really what I want to do today is just give an overview of 7 areas within those 3 divisions within the department that we touch, and then just a little bit of information about the relationship between the state and local governments with regard to permitting and inspection processes for new construction. So just to start off, the Department of Housing, Buildings, and Construction on the building side does not have the authority to require permitting or inspection for single-family homes. It can never do that. Local governments have the option to do that, to require that permitting and inspection, but only if there's a local ordinance that's been passed to require it. So throughout the Commonwealth, you see a number of, let's just call them larger jurisdictions, Jefferson County, Fayette County, Davis County, Northern Kentucky, that have we call them single-family programs. But you also have a number of counties and cities as well that do not have single-family programs. And in those areas, the builder, the contractor is required to build to the residential code standard. However, there's no requirement for a certified building inspector to inspect or confirm compliance with the Kentucky Residential Code in those areas. Multifamily, whether it be a local government with qualified personnel, or if there's not one of those qualified personnel at a local government, the department would do all permitting, plan review, and inspection on that multifamily. And colloquially, that's really a triplex and up. In some instances, it'll be a duplex and up. Modular homes, that's something that I think the Housing Corporation talked about briefly. Those are factory-built homes that are built not to the HUD standard like a manufactured home, but to Kentucky Residential Code standard. The department, we do the plan review for those. However, local governments do the site placement inspections on those. And I will say this, I don't know if this works for you all, but if you all need me to stop, this is a lot, and like I said, I don't have a slide to follow along with, so I apologize. So just stop me if you need me to. But we'll go on. That's the building side, and when I say building, I'm talking about the architectural and structural side, and now I'm just going to kind of go into the system side, and then at the end we'll talk about manufactured housing. So the one truly statewide program for new construction is plumbing. Plumbing, there are no local inspection programs. Everything is handled at the state level. Everything from a single-family home all the way up to a 8 million square foot EV battery facility. The Division of Plumbing handles all permitting, inspection, and plan review for plumbing. There are also permitting requirements for substantial alterations or repairs, so things like water heater changeouts in your home, new water line, new sewer line, all of those would be permitted and inspected by the Division of Plumbing. And then, as I mentioned earlier, on the plan review side, multifamily and larger projects for the Division of Plumbing do require plan review. So again, triplex and larger. Single-family home, no plumbing plan review. Duplex, no plumbing plan review. But triplex and larger do require it. HVAC is probably the most complicated to talk about. HVAC is a new permitting and inspection program at a state level. It came about around 2007, I believe. Isn't that correct, Gary? 2006, 2007. And so what you see there is there were a number of local governments that had HVAC permitting and inspection programs prior to 2007, and they were, for lack of a better term, grandfathered in. So those older existing programs have a little bit more responsibility than, say, the department has or than a newer local program has. And so that cutoff date's January 1 of 2007. So what distinguishes HVAC at the department level from, say, plumbing or building is that the only time a permit or inspection is required for HVAC by the department is, one, if there's no local program, and two, if it's the initial installation of a system. So on new construction, that's always going to be captured, but you have a number of existing buildings or homes that maybe didn't have central heating, central air. When that's installed for the first time, that would require a permit and inspection, even though the building itself already existed. But you know, if a homeowner has to have their outside unit changed out, that's not something that the department would require a permitting inspection for, but it is something in one of those grandfather jurisdictions that permitting and inspection would be required for. Electrical in the context of residential construction is entirely going to be handled by local governments, by local electrical inspectors that are either contracted with or employed by local governments. The department really on the electrical side only does state-owned and state-leased projects, with a couple of exceptions. They do have concurrent jurisdiction on commercial projects that the Division of Building Code Enforcement has jurisdiction over, but it rarely rears its head. And then the two that usually get a lot of question marks from people are boilers and elevators. There are a number of single-family homes and obviously multifamily, complexes that have boilers still, or pressure vessels, hot water, hydronic heat, things like that. If it's in a single-family residence, even on new construction, the department does not look at that. Local government does not look at that. It's exempt from the provisions of the boiler code. But anything in a multifamily would require permitting and inspection. Boiler inspection for new construction is only handled by the Department of Housing, Buildings, and Construction. Additionally, on those boilers and pressure vessels, once installed, they are subject to periodic inspection, and that just depends, the time period depends on the sort of vessel. Elevators, similarly, chairlifts, private residential elevators, the initial installation is inspected and permitted, but those are not subject to the same sort of annual inspection that an elevator in a building like this is subject to. But they are still on the initial permitted and inspected. And then last but certainly not least is manufactured housing. And again, manufactured housing is distinguishable from modular housing. They're built to two different standards. Manufactured homes are built to a HUD standard. The department is the SAA for HUD for administering the manufactured housing program in Kentucky. And on new home installations, the department inspects the site and footer for those new home installations. We do not do that for used homes. However, on a used home, whenever you have a transfer of title, there is what's called a B-seal inspection. Those B-seal inspections are just kind of a basic systems inspection, just to ensure that all the necessities are in place and the life safety things like smoke alarms and fire extinguishers. So that was a lot at a very high level very quickly. So I will open it up to any questions that you all may have. We'll go from there.
Thank you, Mr. Fuller. I did have a question, just your opinion. Obviously, we're here to try to identify some solutions, try to make the housing easier. Have you seen any like times as far as permitting an inspection over the past few years? Has that gotten lengthier? And if so, are there specific reasons that are fixable?
Sure. Yeah. So what I will say, for the department with regard to the limited extent that we're involved in single family, it's the Division of Plumbing, the Division of HVAC. Both of those divisions have inspection turnaround that's less than 3 days. So by reg, the Division of HVAC is a 3-day turnaround. Just by internal policy, the Division of Plumbing, same-day inspections. If that plumber calls in the morning before 9 a.m., he or she's going to get an inspection that day. So it's hard to say. I will say that construction generally, not just residential, but commercial, is up by just about every metric, and it's risen since 2020, and the numbers are higher than I've seen them going back to 2016. So there's a lot going on, but at least this department has done everything that it can to expand its workforce and develop more ways to be as efficient as possible with regards to turnaround time on plan review and inspection.
Senator Higdon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Max, thank you for being here today. And I just want to say publicly thank you for the work you do. You're very responsive when we have calls from constituents, and that's very much appreciated.
Yes, sir.
Talking about turnaround time on planning or approving plans, have you seen that improve over the last little bit? I know you've been working on that.
Yes, sir. It has. When we came in early 2020, mid 2020, we were on. And again, this is commercial plan review, so do with this what you will. But we were looking at about anywhere between 90 days to 100 days from when the department received that set of plans to when it was fully reviewed. And that doesn't necessarily mean approved, but fully reviewed. As of today, we sit between 30 to 38 days on commercial plan review. On expedited site and foundation construction releases, 5 business days. So it has improved substantially over the past 4 or so years, and it's something that we hope to maintain. Like anything, you've got to retain staff, and you've got to retain experienced staff, and that's something that's improved over the past few years. But we have, it's getting that time of year. We've got some retirements coming up, and filling those voids is always difficult.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Yes, Representative Bridges.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question goes to more of the federal building code, the state building code, and then the local interpretations, because I have had different contractors say, why can I build a project that I build for this company 15 times a year, and I won't call any cities, but I can build it in this city, we don't have a problem, go to this city. It's like we're in a different country. Do you see any solution to that? Or, because there are, I know there's gray areas and left for interpretation. Can you just sort of briefly speak on that?
Sure. So uniformity, it really is one of the reasons that this agency exists. It's called the Uniform State Building Code, right? And hypothetically, if you go in any of the 120 counties in Kentucky, you should get the same answer when they ask you a code-related question. Unfortunately, that's not always the case. What the department does do on a couple of levels is it serves as a resource for local governments when they have code-related questions. But like anything, they have to be asked of us. We have seen quite frankly, an uptick in requests for formal interpretations of the code, I'd say over the past 1.5 to 2 years. While it is a little bit more work for us, it is something that we appreciate, because for those gray areas, it gives, the official position throughout the state. We also, I didn't go over this earlier, but, we certify every one of these building inspectors, every one of these electrical inspectors. And to the extent that there may ever be a hint of misconduct on behalf of one of those inspectors, avenues for enforcement exist there as well. Beyond that, there are annual conferences that are actually put on by paid out of the Building Inspector Training Fund, but they're put on by a group called the Code Administrators Association of Kentucky. And so you have instructors coming from various parts of the United States that work with the International Code Council, NFPA, whomever. And those conferences, again, you have to have buy-in, have to have participation, but really serve as a good opportunity for inspectors to, one, network, but two, interact face-to-face with their peers in other counties. Hey, how are you all doing this in Jefferson County? How are you doing this in McCracken County? That I've seen it firsthand. It does seem to help, but it's not going to capture everything.
Thank you.
Representative Burke.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, presenter, plural. Every presenter today has been really helpful. And this question is going to be directed to you, but it may honestly be something that Ms. Smith could speak to. It seems to me that we do have a lot of good data, but I'm wondering if we have all the right data at our fingertips that we need yet. And I'm wondering if you or any of the other entities who have presented today have information about sites that are ready for housing development now. Is this a breakdown of information where we have sites that are ready and we have builders that don't know it? Or should we have a listing like that if we don't already? Are you aware of anything that would make statewide builders or contractors aware of sites that are already prime for development?
Representative Burke, no, that's not something that we have at the department. It's not something that I'm familiar with. On a commercial level, I know, like the Cabinet for Economic Development has something like that, but in the context of residential development, I'm not sure, no.
Do you think that having that information in one place would be beneficial? And if so, do you have a suggestion of where that information could be housed?
I think that it would certainly help having access to that information. I don't know that it could be statewide, just because of the way planning and zoning is held, locally. The enforcement of the residential code on single-family dwellings is done locally. So I don't know where that best would fit, but it may be something absolutely that's beneficial.
I appreciate your response. Thank you.
Anyone else? Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate a lot of great information. Again, this was a lot of information for our first meeting, but it gives me great encouragement that there's a lot to look at, and I think that we can do a lot. So our next meeting is Monday, July 29th at 1 p.m. and this meeting is adjourned.